Are you ready? Well, get comfy, folks. It's story time. So 2 nights ago, my mum received a phone call from an unrestricted number talking about some messed up stuff and called me to come and get her. So I'll pretty much lay out everything that happened. At 3:38 AM, I got a text from my mum asking if I was still up. I replied that I still was, and was curious as to what she wanted, since it was a work night for her and she's always in bed early. My father's a firefighter and it was a night he was on shift, so I knew he wasn't home. Less than a minute after I'd replied, she called me. I answered and my mum was very upset, crying actually, and was asking me to come and pick her up from home, since I live only 2 streets away from her, so it takes me at most 2 minutes to drive to her house. I immediately say yes, throw in my little Bluetooth speaker thing I have and start getting dressed, grab one of my pistols and proceed out the door. Grabbed my pistol because I'm still unsure what's going on, and since I have my concealed carry license, it's not uncommon for me to carry. As I'm rushing to get ready, I'm asking what's wrong. She tells me that at about 3:28 she got a phone call from a restricted number, and answered because it woke her up. Upon answering, she said some guy started talking, who she didn't recognise. She's unclear what he initially started saying when she picked up, since she was still out of it from just waking. But when alert, she said the man said he was babysitting a 9-year-old girl named Ashley. Earlier on, when she was on the couch with him, he did stuff to her, basically saying he molested her. Obviously, my mum is completely blindsided by what's going on, and immediately starts asking who she's speaking to. Asking if this is some kind of sick prank call, and says don't call her ever again, and hangs up. Immediately the restricted number calls back and tries talking to her again, and again she states this better not be some sick prank, and hangs up. So he calls a 3rd time and is saying stuff again, though my mum wasn't too sure what he was saying, since at this point she was very uncomfortable and headed to the kitchen to turn on all the house lights and grab one of her knives, and again she hung up. The number calls for a 4th time, and Mum tells him, "Listen, I'm done playing your games. I'm going to call the cops. Who is this?" In which she said he angrily replies, "No, you listen up. I'm not here to answer your questions. You're here to listen to me. Now you're going to stay on the line and listen to everything I did to this girl, otherwise I'm going into her room and doing it again." My mum hangs up again, and that's when she texts and calls me and stays on the line with me as I'm quickly getting ready and heading over there. While on the line, he calls a 5th time, and my mum ignores the call, but says he left a voicemail this time. While on my way there, which again I live a 2-minute drive away, he calls a 6th and 7th time, which my mum ignores, and then that's when I pull up to the side of her home. Also, not sure if this is some weird coincidence or not, but as I'm about 2 or 3 houses down from hers, about to pull up, is when they stop calling. That being said, I was still around the corner, so her home wouldn't have been even in sight yet when they stopped. So she jumps in my car, and we drive to the police station. Also, I'm a firefighter for my city, so I knew a cop working, and knew I'd rather bring all this up to him as opposed to just calling 911. So we get there and explain everything to him. Mum tells him about the voicemail. She says she doesn't want to listen to it and asks the cop if he can, and maybe get a sense of what Mum is talking about in regards to this number calling. So cop listens to it, says it's about 15 seconds long, and says, "Yeah, you probably don't want to listen to that." Anyway, I ask if it's possible to trace a restricted number, since I thought you could, but he says he doesn't think you can. So he goes back and gets the supervising officer to get his input on what could be done. Supervising officer confirms that a restricted call can't be traced and says unfortunately there's not really anything that can be done. He asks my mum if she either recognised the man's voice, knew a little girl named Ashley, or heard the sounds of a little girl basically crying or struggling on the phone calls, and Mum says no. So therefore, there really isn't any way or any reason to get a detective involved. He also suggested that there's probably a strong possibility that this is just some guy fabricating this whole story because this is how this weirdo gets off. Just kind of crazy that out of any random number this dude could call to a girl happens to be my mum's. The officer says, best case scenario, my mum's cell phone provider most likely could trace the call and see the number and who it belongs to, but assured us that most likely the phone company would absolutely not give us this info unless we had orders from a judge. So basically we just filed out a report and I brought my mum home and waited until my dad got off work in the morning. Has anyone ever heard of something like this happening before? Should I try to get hold of the phone company and see if I can get any info at all? I'm sure it would sort of put my mum at ease if the number is likely from a few states over, as opposed to a local number. I don't know, it just seems weird to try and brush this whole thing off and hope they never call my mum again. The way I see it is, if someone makes a bomb threat to a school, which is usually just some kid or someone not serious at all, it's always treated as if it's true and becomes a huge ordeal. So why not treat a phone call of a little girl being molested not in the same category? Should I pursue getting info or not? Edit. So it's been 2 days and no calls, which is good. Stopped by my mum's phone provider and briefly explained the situation and was ultimately shot down, saying they could not release any of the caller's information to my parent. Though my dad is pretty close with some of the officers, so they are trying to work with him since, with a subpoena from a judge, the phone company could release the information. Okay, I'll start by saying this is my first time posting on Reddit, so I apologise in advance if I'm not doing this right. Bear with me through all of this rambling. This has been an ongoing unravelling story in my life over the course of the last 4 months, and it's just been slowly getting weirder and weirder. I have no idea what to make of it all, so I'd really appreciate any input. I guess the story starts 7 years ago, when I was 13. I went on this week-long cruise in the Caribbean with my family. One night I was sitting in the ship's theatre with my mum, when she pointed at a guy about my age sitting in the row in front of us and said, "Hey, he's pretty cute," in a teasing mum sort of way. I glanced over and the strangest feeling rushed over me. I can honestly say I haven't felt anything like it either before or since. It was like a sense of sudden, inexplicable recognition. I know there's a whole love at first sight cliche, but I wouldn't even call it that, honestly. It wasn't even romantic at first, just sort of a magnetic pull that this person had on my subconscious. I kept looking over at him. I'll refer to him as John from now on, even though that's not his actual name. During the whole movie, it kind of felt like when you see someone at the grocery store you met a long time ago and you're trying to remember their name. The next day, I went to a teen club on the ship where there was organised activities and where you could meet other kids your age. As I was sitting with my brother and another guy we were hanging out with, the guy from the theatre the night before walked in. He sat with us and we all started talking, telling stories, cracking jokes, that sort of thing. I remember feeling like we had this weird kind of connection between us. I'll try to explain it the best I can. Basically it was like whenever someone would say something, we'd look at each other, and when our eyes locked, it was that feeling you have. Basically it was like whenever someone would say something, we'd look at each other, and when our eyes locked, it was that feeling when you have an inside joke with your best friend. Except that, of course, I barely knew the guy. Over the next few days, the group of us hung out together doing typical stuff, walking around the ship, participating in some of the teen club activities, and so on. The last night of the cruise, John, my brother, our other friend and I were all walking around the ship. John said, "Hey, let me show you guys something," and he took us to this lookout point on the very top deck. I distinctly remember this feeling rushing over me, this feeling like I needed to mentally photograph everything around me so I could always remember that moment. So I saved it all in my head. The smell of rain and seawater, the stars shining above us, the sound of the rushing waves on all sides of the ship, and the city lights way off on the shore in the distance. I never forgot that moment. We all decided we wanted to go swimming, so we said we'd go back to our rooms to change into our bathing suits and then meet back at the pool. I remember John looking back at me as he was walking away and saying jokingly, "I know you guys are just going to ditch me." That was the last time I saw him. When I got back to the pool after changing into my swimsuit, John wasn't there. I waited for almost an hour, but he never showed. I started running around the ship searching everywhere for him, but I never found him. That night I wrote my name and number on a piece of paper, thinking that maybe I'd see him the next morning before getting off the ship. I never did. When I got home I searched on Facebook for John, but I couldn't find him. I had a lot of numbers from the other kids who were on the ship with us, but none of them had gotten John's number. The time went on, and I kept waiting for my childish crush to die away. I dated 2 other guys long term, one of whom I thought I'd end up marrying someday. I went to college and graduated early. I moved to the city I'd always wanted to live in and pursued a calling I've been passionate about my whole life. Through all of these changes, the memory of John stuck with me. It sounds crazy to say this, but even when I was dating other guys, I always had this strange feeling in the back of my mind that if I randomly reconnected with John, I'd have to break up with whoever I was with because he was the one I was meant to be with. I know that doesn't make sense. I mean, it didn't make sense with me even when it was a thought that crossed my mind. From time to time, I even found myself searching Facebook trying to find John. By the time I turned 19, I knew I'd never forget him, but I also gave up believing I'd ever meet him again. That was when the first of a series of many weird things happened. I was living in a dorm at college. I should preface this by saying I wasn't a spiritual person at the time. I thought psychics were fake, and the concept of parallel universes or glitches or premonitions were all a joke. But despite being incredibly logically minded, something happened to me that I can't explain to this day. I had a dream like none I'd ever had before. In the dream, I was sitting at a table in a building that looked kind of like an empty airport. Sitting across from me was John, and somehow I just knew that in the dream it was John from the cruise. I don't remember what we were talking about, just that we were talking and laughing, and it was the most amazing feeling in the world. At the end of the dream I started to realise, while still dreaming, that I was starting to wake up. I panicked because I realised I still didn't know his last name. Right as I was regaining consciousness, a white scrap of paper with John's full first and last name flashed in front of my vision. I woke up at 3 AM to the sound of my own voice repeating his name over and over, very loud, like I was trying to remember it. I remember feeling very startled, because I'd never woke up to myself talking in my sleep, let alone saying a name. So I put the name in my phone notes and fell back asleep. The next day I searched the name on Facebook, but I couldn't find anything. I decided the dream was just some crazy fluke. Months went by. Then last December, 2016, I logged into Facebook and saw that a guy had accepted my friend request. I was confused because I hadn't remembered adding anyone. The guy had the same first and last name as in my dream. I thought that maybe there was some off chance I'd added him back in February, when I'd had the dream, and he'd only just gotten around to accepting. But like I said, I really don't remember adding him. Facebook John messaged me and asked if we'd met. At this point, I honestly didn't expect it to be the guy from the cruise, but I told him I'd been on a cruise a while ago, and met a guy with his name. He told me he actually had been on a cruise, but it had been years ago. He couldn't remember what year, but he guessed he went in 2008. Mine was 2010, so it almost just ended the conversation right there. But even though I had low expectations for the whole situation, I thought we might as well compare details for our cruises to see if they matched up. Everything did. And it was like, I was listing off the details and he was like, "Oh yeah, I did that too." It was like a back and forth sharing of details. So there's no way either of us could have been just agreeing to the details the other was presenting. John said he remembered meeting a girl with brown hair in a green dress. I wore a green dress. But he didn't remember her name. He also said she gave him a scrap of paper with something on it, but he couldn't remember. This is weird because I'd written out a note to give to him, but never actually got a chance to give it to him, and I didn't tell Facebook John about this note. His sister was in a stroller at the time. I remember seeing him push a stroller, and his siblings were approximately the ages I remember them being. His cruise went to the same places as mine, and was the same length as mine, but honestly all these details don't mean much because I know now that still could have been coincidental. But there's one very specific detail that really gets me. The only story I specifically remember John telling on the cruise was a funny story about something they did to prank their band director once during a concert to ruin it. I couldn't remember exactly what the story was. I mentioned to Facebook John that I remembered the guy I met telling me some story about a band concert. Immediately, Facebook John starts telling me the story of something in band group in 6th grade they did to prank their conductor, and when he told the story it gave me chills. Because the way Facebook John told the story was exactly the same way I remember Cruise John telling it. It just instantly jogged my memory, because even the wording was exactly the same. I had given literally no information about this story, so the fact he nailed it exactly is too uncanny to be coincidental. After that point, although we had no definite confirmation, I kind of assumed this was the same guy I had met on the cruise. We got closer and closer, and honestly talking to him was more natural than with any guy I'd ever met. Although I didn't know for sure this was Cruise John, for the first time in my life that feeling I'd always had in relationships, that I'd always wonder about my childhood misconnection, was completely gone. Okay, so all this would be weird enough, but things got even weirder. I hesitate to even include this because if you don't already think I'm crazy, then you really will after hearing what I'm about to say. One night, John and I had been talking on the phone for about 4 hours. Then we both hung up and went to sleep immediately after. I woke up in the middle of the night to a text from John that made my blood run cold. I'm a songwriter-singer, and sometimes during our calls I'd show him songs that I'd been working on. In the text he said something along the lines of, "Your voice sounded absolutely beautiful. I loved how the song sounded on the piano, and the way it sounded softer and sweeter than the songs you played on guitar." Or something like that. But the thing is, I hadn't sang anything for him that night on the phone, and I didn't have a piano in my apartment, so there's no way he heard me playing a song on piano. The text got even weirder. He said something like, "You asked me a few questions, so I wanted to answer those now." And again, this made no sense because I hadn't asked any questions. Then he had these numbered answers, 1 to 3, all various answers about circumstances of our meeting on the cruise. So this would already be kind of odd, but there's something that makes it a million times weirder. Like I said, I'm a songwriter, and 3 years ago, 2014, I wrote a love song on piano all about my meeting with John. I had created an anonymous YouTube channel and uploaded this song on it as a sort of misconnection post. In the video, I said that if John happened to see the video, he should email me the answer to the following 3 questions. The video never got more than 1,000 views. But this is the crazy part. Those answers John texted me were the answers to the 3 questions from the video. The text went something like, "You already know the answers to these questions, but..." And then he answered all 3 of them. I had never told him about the song or the video. The next day I asked him about the text. He insisted he didn't remember sending it, only that he'd had a dream about the cruise. Well, after all these crazy coincidences, we just found out a few weeks ago that we weren't on the same cruise at all. We'd both been on identical 7-day cruises on the exact same cruise line and ship, but in totally different years. He went spring break 2008, and I went spring break 2010. His sister just confirmed it. Another possibly relevant fact, I asked my brother, who was hanging out with me and John, if he remembered the guy I'd had a crush on during the cruise. He said, "Oh yeah, weren't you into that Kevin guy?" Kevin was the other guy hanging out with us. I said, "No, John." And he replied, "Oh, I don't remember him." I found this weird because John was hanging out with us just as much as Kevin, and I also distinctly remember talking to my brother about John right after the cruise, but he had no recollection of him at all. So what am I supposed to make of all this? Any input? Update. A few of you have asked to see the video I posted on YouTube, as well as John's messages where he answered the questions in the video. So I'll apologise in advance for the cheesiness of all this, but here you go. YouTube video screenshot, with the questions I asked in the misconnection video with the song I wrote playing in the background. And Snapchat text message I got from him in the middle of the night one night, randomly answering the questions and talking about how beautiful the song was. I'd never actually shown him the video with the song or questions. And the links to both of those can be found in the video description. I work at a retail store and I detest my job with all my heart, and because I was a dumb shit and said I'm always available, they routinely screw me over and put me on nights. but I whine and bitch and moan and digress. I'm okay working nights, since I get to see my boyfriend when he picks me up. Boyfriend usually gets off at 10:30, but he doesn't leave until 11 most nights, so I'd have to wait for him. On top of that, he has to make a 10-minute drive, so I'd have to wait an hour and 40 to 45 minutes, which didn't bother me. He'd called to tell me he was coming and make sure that I was still alive. Earlier in the week, an Uber driver kept asking me if I was someone named Lenore. I told him no, and he did it again, but this time he kept asking if I was sure. How the fuck am I not going to be sure of my name? Fortunately, boyfriend pulled in and honked at me, causing Uber creep to speed away. I'm a paranoid penny, so this made me wonder if he'd been watching me and knew my boyfriend always came late. And then I tweaked out since I kept getting these weird phone calls from some telemarketing agency. But when I answer, no one is there and they hang up. Is it connected? Is it the government watching me? Do I have 7 days left? Fast forward 3 days later, and I'm standing there listening to some music waiting for him to pick me up or call. Finally does, and he starts cracking a joke about how he's glad creepy Uber didn't answer. As we start shooting the shit and joking, this Indian woman comes up. I don't hear her at first, since I have noise-cancelling headphones. She gets closer and keeps calling to me. Finally she yells, "Hey!" I look over at her and smile, and then go back to talking to my boyfriend. She does it again, and I excuse myself. "Hi, can I help you?" "Do you need a ride?" she asks, and she looks nice enough. But something just didn't settle with me. Her car is parked at the stop sign, and there's someone else in it. "No, my friend is coming for me, thank you." I notice there is a man in the driver's seat, and that she isn't wearing a uniform from either of the stores near us. She begins to ask again, "Are you sure? I can give ride. Do you need ride? Get in. Do you need ride?" I begin to feel a little uncomfortable, and my preschool don't get in a stranger's car training kicks in, so I politely decline and go back to talking to boyfriend. "So, are you close?" "Just pulled out. I'll get there. Just stay on the line. Is that woman gone?" No, she wasn't gone. In fact, she was standing 6 feet away watching me, and she looked annoyed. I told him in code that no, she had not left. She has in fact remained there, leaning on the car, just watching me, and she is looking angrier with each passing second. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the man tell her something, and she looks at me and begins interrogating me. "Friend not here. Do you need a ride?" "Where friend? He probably forgot you." "That's okay. We give ride. It's cold. Get in. Tell us where you live. We drop you off. Do you need a ride?" At this point, she begins to get closer to me. I try to avoid her by moving to the furthest end of the plaza strip. "Honey? So yeah, about my sister." "Well, she's gotten closer. But I'm pretty scared. She's too far away from home. Something might happen. Hurry so I can tell you," I say in code as the car drives up. Now she looks pissed. "Get in the car now. We give you ride. Get in now." At this point, she opens the car and begins trying to get me inside, pulling me, yanking on my jacket. She's a taller and bigger woman, so she tries to pick me up. At this point, my bowels threaten to release, and I'm screaming and kicking and wiggling. Meanwhile, I can hear boyfriend yelling at me that he's coming and that he's calling the police. Now my mind is running 1,000 miles an hour, and I'm panicking, thinking I'm going to get raped or be some weird present for her husband, since he looks content with her effort to kidnap me. "Get in! Shut up! I will hit you. You need ride. Be quiet. You come with us. You want to see a house? Very nice. You need ride." I start crying as she manages to get my torso in the car. My right hand is locked on my phone and she begins trying to take it, and boyfriend is panicking, telling me the police are sending an officer. She shoves my face into her leather seat. Now my airway is obstructed, and she's not letting me go. She's bigger than me, stronger than me, and she knows it. Her whole weight is on me. I try not to panic so I don't black out from the lack of oxygen, and all of a sudden I start getting mad as shit. Her husband says something in Punjab, and she lifts one hand up and leans down, trying to get something from the front. I immediately use the arms I'd been using to push myself off the seat to stab her stomach. She recoils, letting go of me a little, and I headbutt her. tossing my melon back as I scream, fear-stricken and adrenaline-hazed. "That's my purse! I don't know you!" Finally, my boyfriend pulls in. I bolt to his car as the Indian woman is sitting on the ground. After I shut the door, he speeds off towards his house. When we get inside, I break down, babbling about how scared and terrifying it all was, and how if I hadn't had that opportunity, she might have taken me to her house and done God knows what. The police officer they dispatched got there 20 minutes afterwards and didn't find anyone. My boyfriend talked to his boss and was granted the ability to leave early for me. I'm still weirded out by cars stalling in the plaza. I was also a little upset that my war cry was a line from King of the Hill. So, Indian woman and man in a black Toyota, let's never, ever, 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 ever meet.